One News last night revealed details of employers profiting from vulnerable immigrants by paying them below the minimum wage, sometimes as little as $8 an hour. Here's a reminder of Amy Kelly's exclusive report.
This takeaway shop owner wants a new kitchen hand, but he's only prepared to pay $11 an hour.
现在最低工资是不是13.5啊？
His view shared by two more employers One News caught out, offering pay rates below New Zealand's minimum wage of $13.50 an hour.
What are they earning in there, Mr. Chen?
My wife.
What are the rest of the employees earning? This is a common thing in the Asian business community. Why?
A lot of migrants or international students, they hesitate to exercise their legal rights because they are scared and also they're desperate for a job.
With this employment lawyer's help, we created the profile of a student migrant job seeker and sifted through jobs listings on Sky Kiwi, a website for Chinese living in New Zealand. At China Hong Kong restaurant in Auckland's Birkenhead, she's offered $40 a night. That's just $8 an hour.
打個依正常，我依家最低工資係咪13.5啊？去到已經。而家稅前好似佢哋貴到呢一行人好少俾到咁多。
But when we confront Mr. Chen, he calls what he offered our job seeker a trial rate.
One night, you check it. You okay or not okay? Just see.
We point out even workers signed up to trial periods are entitled to the minimum wage. Amy Kelly, One News.
But just how widespread is the problem and which industries are affected the most? Dane Anderson from the Business School at AUT University joins me now. Dane, welcome to the show first of all. Now this topic is actually part of your PhD research.
That's
You
right.
say that the deeper that you research this, the bigger the problem becomes and the more concerned you are. What are your main concerns here?
I think that one of the big issues is that we're seeing it across a large number of sectors. It's primary industry, obviously the horticulture sector, which I researched in, but also what Amy's research is saying is the same findings that I've found in Auckland as well, the service sector. And I think we've got real concerns about migrants coming into New Zealand, the sorts of conditions they're sold overseas, and the reality of what they find when they get here. It's not necessarily all that they've been sold.
How under pressure are these migrants to work for this super low wage?
I think a lot of the time it comes down to a bit of racism. It's hard to get a job at the moment anyway, and particularly if your English isn't particularly good, you're going to be further limited. A lot of them, particularly the Indian students that I've surveyed, they have large loans that they've taken out for education. So not only are they living here and having to pay reasonably high costs of living here, they're also servicing large loans with high interest rates back in their home country. If you're only allowed to work 20 hours a week, even if you're getting minimum wage by the time the tax comes off, that's an extremely low income to try and live on in Auckland.
But people are still prepared to do it. These migrant workers still want to do it, and isn't that the problem?
I think they're sold something that they don't necessarily find the reality is the same. But when you look at the illegal side of things, there's a lot of pressure. Communities rip off communities, to be blatant. You saw the Chinese last night. They were hiring other Chinese. Indian contractors rip off Indians. So it very much stays within the local industry and it very much stays within the communities.
But this negates your research, though, because you went down to the Bay of Plenty and you did some research down there with what sort of agriculture, horticulture industries?
This was in the horticulture industry. It was primarily to do with the kiwi fruit sector. We surveyed 93 across 5 work sites there, and all of them were paid illegally. And almost all of them were Indians. So there's a labour hire contractor model there where the contractor is paid for a job, they hire illegally and they pocket the profit.
Isn't it the Department of Labour's job to actually sort these people out?
I think it's a very difficult one here because effectively what it is, we are looking at illegal workers. These people are invisible. Statistically, how do we measure them? How do we know who they are? They're not exactly going to run to the Department of Labour because they are working in breach of their visa conditions. So I work with Horticulture New Zealand and I also work with Department of Labour They work together on a Labour governance group, and we are all very concerned. Believe me, I'm not beating up on either of those because we spend a lot of time talking about these problems, and it is unsustainable for industry in New Zealand. The horticultural industry, if they keep going down this track, it's a flawed model and they cannot keep going using this sort of labour hire practice.
All right. And thank you for that, Dana Anderson from AUT's School of Business, a lecturer in management. And Amy Kelly will have another part of this report tonight on One News at 6 o'clock.
This One News update is brought to you by ANZ, proud sponsor of the New Zealand Olympic team.
Kia ora, good evening. An exclusive One News investigation has moved the government to crack down on third world treatment of workers.
The undercover probe we showed you last night exposed businesses exploiting migrant workers by offering to pay them well under the minimum wage.
The response to Amy Kelly's story was swift, and she joins us now live again. Amy, a big reaction to your investigation last night. What sort of action can we expect?
Well, Peter, small business areas like this one at the top of Auckland's Queen Street can soon expect more spontaneous visits from labour inspectors, just one of a number of changes brought about by our investigation. Our expose on migrant worker exploitation has prompted a crackdown, a beefed-up education campaign, more workplace checks and new penalties are on the cards.
We don't want sort of sloppy behaviour that might be accepted overseas to be actually transferred to New Zealand.
We'll certainly be stepping up our effort well above what it is now.
Until now, the Department of Labour, recently renamed the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, has relied on employees to report dodgy bosses.
The majority of migrants, they don't raise disputes. They don't make a complaint. They worry about whether they can legally stay in this country.
Take Arjun Krishnan. He had the courage to complain and now faces deportation.
I thought I would be safe because they did promise me that I would be safe.
The liquor store worker reported his boss for paying him just $6 an hour. In the process, he admitted working more hours than his student visa allowed, so he could make enough to live on. Now he's been told he won't receive a new visa when his expires next week.
This is the reason nobody come forward, and I don't want any other immigrant, showing this courage and getting into trouble like me.
Now the ministry tells us it wants to take a more proactive approach to enforcing the minimum wage.
Mobilising resources from around the country, working with our immigration officers, labour inspectors and speakers of community languages, going into workplaces in particular pockets where we think there are issues.
As for guilty employers,
their migration status could be at stake also.
There's no silver bullet. Immigration advisors tell us the system needs a complete rethink. But more efforts to catch out employers like this must be a good start. Now, labour inspectors have already paid a visit to one of the employers in last night's story. They tell me they'll be paying visits to the other two tomorrow. But some say that this crackdown isn't enough. Darian Fenton, the Labour spokesperson for the Labour Party, is calling for a national inquiry, an idea that the government, when we put it to them, seem to be tiptoeing around. Peter?
Amy Kelly, thank you.
This One News update is brought to you by ANZ, proud sponsor of the New Zealand Olympic team.